Today we are celebrating Scout Sunday. At first service, we had lots of kids and an incredible presentation of a multi-faith experience from both the Scouts and Girl Scouts, sharing from their own connections to their faith traditions and to the scouting experience that they share. You might want to check out that service because it was really phenomenal, and at least hear the kids' portion where they were really sharing about their faiths. But we're going to do something a little bit different for you here at Second Service. We're going to sit down with a conversation with Scoutmaster and our own Paul Strasma. Paul and his wife, Shanti, and two boys, Nikhil and Anand, have been members of IUCC for about 6 years, I think. He's actually a PK, a pastor's kid, growing up in a Methodist church where his father served. Shanti did not come from a Christian background, and when it came time for them to raise their kids, they decided to look for a place where they would both feel comfortable, a place that is inclusive and open, and they found IUCC. Shanti serves on our administration board, and Paul has been active in many ways, most recently serving in a real leadership role on our preschool refresh. So, Paul, let's sit down and talk scouting. Do you want to grab that right there? So, how did you get involved in scouting? Were you a Boy Scout yourself, and what has it meant to you over the years?
Sure. Well, I grew up in scouting. My father was an Eagle Scout, and my grandfathers on both sides were Scouts as well. One of my earliest memories was of my mother gathering together 5 of my friends in first grade and sitting in one of their houses to form a tiger cub den. We lived in a small Midwest town at the time, so that was pretty much all there was for scouting. Just my friends coming over to our house and doing little activities that seemed straight out of Little House on the Prairie. The summer after 3rd grade, we moved to a larger town. Now I was a 4th grade Weeblo Scout, and there were a bunch of kids of different ages that all got together to play games and do activities. I've learned now that's called a pack. That was the first and only year I built a Pinewood Derby car. I distinctly recall mine was the slowest of all of them. In 5th grade, then I bridged over to a Boy Scout troop, and it met at the gym of the local Catholic church. We all made sure to show up at meetings really early because in the summer we got to play capture the flag. And then in the winter, we'd play dodgeball in the gym. I remember holding a an election for patrol leader of our little gang of boys, and there was this one relatively young adult who wore these funny beads around his neck and kept trying to get everyone to tie knots. So with Scouts, I had the joy of going on some high adventure trips. One winter, we went to Northern Tier in Minnesota to cross-country ski in the wilderness in February. I froze my boots. It was very scary.
Wow.
The next summer, we went scuba diving in the Florida Keys. In 1989, I went to the National Jamboree, where we got to hear a speech from President Bush. A rock band did a rendition of God Bless America. And then there was this really cool laser light show, while Steven Spielberg received his Distinguished Eagle Scout Award. Wow. Very memorable. Finally, at age 15, I earned my Eagle Scout rank after completing a trail maintenance project at our local Argyle Lake State Park. And then I forgot about scouting.
So what brought you back all these years later?
So after business school in the early 2000s, I was recruited to join a startup. It was led by a prominent serial entrepreneur who had raised a lot of money. It turned out to be a really toxic environment, a culture of covering up the leader's indiscretions. About a month with the company, and I found myself at a medical conference wondering what on earth I'd just gotten myself into. Middle of the night, what bubbled up to me was words from the Scout law. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, brave. And in that moment, it really crystallized for me, I'm running with the wrong crowd here.
Wow.
Keeping company with an abusive leader was not what I'd signed up for, and I wasn't proud to be an employee of that company. The leader's behavior certainly would not have made my Scoutmaster proud. So in that moment, all saying it over and over as a kid suddenly came back, and it was what I needed in that time. And then I forgot about scouting again.
So then how did you end up where you are now as a leader?
So fast forward to 2013, after Shanti and I had moved to Irvine. Nikhil came home from first grade, all excited. He said, "Dad, I want to shoot a bow and arrow. Can we join Scouts with Douglas?" And I thought to myself, oh, yeah, I guess I did Scouts in first grade too. I guess I need to go see what this is about. Nikhil was into soccer at the time, and Shanti and I were a bit concerned about scheduling challenges, taking on another activity, juggling 2 kids and 2 jobs. And the den for his grade was already full. They already had 8 kids. So the only way for Nikhil to join would be for me to agree to register as a volunteer and train to be a den leader. I said yes, the rest is history. So the kids had a blast that fall, and it was great getting to know the other parents, going through similar challenges, raising first graders here in Irvine. Then the bomb dropped. Our den leader resigned. Her son was quitting. Now I was in charge of this den of 12 boys. This was overwhelming. I'm standing in front of a room of 6-year-old boys and their parents to start a first den meeting. There needed to be some semblance of order. I was completely incompetent. We do not appreciate our teachers enough. How do they do it with twice as many kids? So, in any case, I remembered, do the Scout sign, everyone gets silent, survive the experience. A couple of months later, I got asked to serve as the chair of the PAC's parent committee. I will admit to thinking, okay, organizing parents is going to be way easier than running around kids. This is a much better fit.
So are there more stories to you as a leader? Because many of us remember the Boy Scouts and really the homophobia that we can recall, particularly about 15 years ago when we were really involved in the equal marriage fight. And many UCC churches were actually deciding not to host Scout troops, and they were pulling back because we recognized the exclusion of gay leaders, the exclusion of gay kids. I know it's undergone quite a transformation. Even the name has changed, so hopefully you'll tell us about that. But can you share your own personal journey and how that corresponds to the national journey of the Scouts?
Sure. So this is quite a story. Bear with me as it took me some research to figure this out. So back in early 2010s, BSA, or Boy Scouts of America, was at the center of the culture wars. Obama had just ended the military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy in early 2011. For the prior decade, BSA had been aligned with the military, officially making no efforts to determine sexual orientation, but then banning youth and adults who were identified as openly homosexual from taking leadership roles in the organization. Talking to Becky about this, she was telling me that for her, growing up, Scouts was always a safe place because there was no role for sex in the organization. And that, I guess, was the thinking, was that we're here to protect the youth, and if you're going to make this an issue, you can't represent Scouts. You'll note here today, I'm not wearing my Scout uniform. I'm here as a member of this church and as a parent volunteer. And the UCC had long been critical of BSA's policy, stating in 2003 that that particular policy made those affected feel diminished, invisible, and marginalized. The denomination left the decision to whether or not to charter scouting units to local congregations. Collectively, UCC churches were one of the top 10 organizations, chartering about 1,000 groups of children with 35,000 scouts. That was a little about 1.5% of the total membership back at the time. So just before I became a leader, BSA was reviewing its membership policies because of the change in the military policy, and said it was going to officially affirm its ban on openly homosexual and youth or adult members. This decision set off a firestorm of protest. There's an infographic that GLAAD published showing how out of step the Boy Scouts of America were with every other organization. The Boys and Girls Club, Girl Scouts, 4-H, Campfire, all of them welcomed everyone, regardless of gender, ethnicity, race, except for the BSA. So as a new parent getting involved in scouting, I was having friends send me New York Times articles and sharing their opinions of the policy. It was really uncomfortable. The United Way ended its funding of scouting, and we saw these issues playing out at the local PTAs. Staff of the Orange County Council weren't allowed to visit schools or distribute flyers. The California PTA issued guidance that local PTAs should refuse to charter scouting units that restricted their membership based on gender identity. The The whole model of having Cub Scout packs meet at middle schools or elementary schools and be chartered by PTAs was falling apart, right as I got handed the job. Wow, what had I gotten myself into? So after a year of really public debate, BSA actually reversed itself and announced mid-13 that it would no longer ban openly gay youth. Unfortunately, that made no one happy. UCC and other inclusive denominations were really unsatisfied with the policy. What about camp counselors, employees, volunteer leaders? They were not allowed to serve. And locally, here at UCC, Matt Mirmack and Becky Roach said, hey, IUCC, let's form Troop 602. In this case, IUCC members stepped forward to be the change that BSA needed. Matt also joined a national IUCC working group on scouting to advocate for further change in the policy. Meanwhile, other groups, such as the Baptists, threatened a boycott. They, in the end, decided not to actually leave, but they strongly condemned the new policy. And the 3 million Boy Scouts of America started splintering. Trails Life USA was formed to raise godly boys, eventually collecting a number of members. That fall, BSA recruited Robert Gates to serve on its national executive board as the organization's president-elect. Secretary Gates had served in both the Bush and Obama administrations, preparing the military for the eventual repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. I remember hearing that news and thinking, wow, that is a brilliant hire. Interestingly, Gates promised to focus the organization on healing its divisions. He promised for 2 years he was not going to touch the membership policy. He was going to instead attempt to implement it. It didn't go particularly well. Some councils openly defied the national policy, like Massachusetts Bay Area, I think in specific, refused to remove openly gay leaders from their positions. Meanwhile, locally, IUCC was chartering an inclusive troop. Employment discrimination lawsuits were filed in states that had laws to protect sexual orientation. And locally, families were questioning whether they wanted to be associated with an affiliation that was discriminatory and, frankly, in the midst of chaos. So shortly after I accepted the role of PAC committee chair, my predecessor handed me my very own hot potato. A new family had just attended our spring recruiting, and their daughter identified as a boy. The school acknowledged that choice of gender. How could they join Cub Scouts? One of my favorite prayers growing up was Reinhold Niebuhr's prayer for serenity. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to tell the difference. I consulted with the Cub Master, consulted with the den leader who would be having the scout join their den, and we decided that we could commit to making our pack a safe space for the young boy. While we certainly weren't going to serve as the bathroom police, we also had not signed up as volunteers to defy the organization's official policies. So it was really only going to work if the family was okay checking boy box on the application and then participating as a family on all of our pack campouts. We had no control over what might happen at a council-run resident camp, summer camp, what would happen in a few years when that child was ready to join Boy Scouts. The family agreed and had a couple of wonderful years of scouting. Meanwhile, nationally, Gates was finding that healing the divisions just was not feasible. At the May 2015 meeting, he told the assembled board and delegates, "We must deal with the world as it is, not as we must wish it would be. The status quo in our movement's membership standards cannot be maintained." He then went further and advocated a policy of allowing each charter organization, 70% of which were churches like IUCC, to simply establish their own membership standards. I support a policy that accepts and respects our different perspectives and beliefs, allows religious organizations, based on the First Amendment protection of religious freedom, to establish their own standards for adult leaders, and preserve the Boy Scouts of America now and forever. I truly fear that any other alternative will be the end of us as a national movement. 2 months later, in July 2015, the executive board voted 45-12 to end the leadership ban, and devolve responsibility down to the local charter organizations like IUCC. They authorized what we'd been doing for 2 years. A few months later, a memorandum was officially authorized by that UCC Scouting Working Group that Matt was on and signed between UCC and BSA. The team had succeeded. About that time, Matt also reached out to me with an offer to charter PAC 654. We'd been meeting at Meadow Park Elementary School just down the block for several years, but because of all the controversies, our charter had actually gotten shifted over to the American Legion in Newport Beach with a bunch of other PACs that got kicked out of schools. With membership standards now determined by the charter organization, it became possible and important to find a compatible local sponsor for our PAC. So I started doing some research about IUCC. I visited a Troop 602 meeting and was really impressed with what I found. It gave me hope knowing there was a troop that would welcome transgender scouts from our PAC and others. In the end, Matt's proposal to charter 654 was just a step too far. Our parent committee was much more comfortable affiliating with the local Kiwanis Club, whose mission was simply to dedicate to support programs for children. Little did we know that the BSA bathroom wars were not yet over. In December 2016, BSA again made the news by expelling an 8-year-old transgender Cub Scout. PAC 654 was once again in violation of national policies. Thankfully, this time the controversy only lasted about 2 months. By the end of January 2017, the policy was revised and transgender youth were officially welcomed to BSA. Coincidentally, that news came out the same weekend that Shanti and I first visited an IUCC service. We were impressed by Pastor Paul and the whole concept of open communion. 6 years later, we're now celebrating Scouting anniversary with scouts from all over.
What a journey. It's easy to see why so many people wanted to keep an arm's distance, and yet you really were part of the transformation. What we love to say is be the change you wish to see, and you've really lived that out when so many of us wanted to turn the other direction. And I know many people did turn the other direction, which is why the Scouts have lost so many church sponsorships, the school sponsorships, all of those things. How is it panning out now as the changes have occurred? Girls obviously have always had the option of Girl Scouts. Now they're joining the Scouts. Where do they fit in? I know Girl Scouts have also been known for their advocacy and their acceptance of LGBTQ plus kids, so trans girls have been welcome. How about transgender kids moving forward in the Scouts, and are they welcomed as their own gender identity, and where do other girls fit in?
Yes, so admitting girls to the program was the final step to becoming inclusive. In 2018, girls were officially allowed to join Cub Scouts in a pilot program. When the decision was announced, all the families in PAC 654 just started cheering. We'd always encourage siblings to come along on our campouts and join in our events and participate. But now all those sisters could actually register, earn the awards, and be equal members of our PAC. So Heidi Bramlett, my successor as committee chair of PAC 654, and now chairperson of the Rancho San Joaquin District, which meets over here the second Thursday of every month, was eager to lead this particular charge. My son Ananth was in kindergarten that year, and we signed up to join the very first co-ed lion den of kindergarten kids. Heidi's daughter Ripley and Zoe Rank, who you saw here leading the flag ceremony, and we're both in that den together. If you saw in the early service, you note that they both, Zoe and Jennifer, both wore their Girl Scout uniforms. They're also both Cub Scouts and now members of Scouts BSA. Every year, their moms ask them, and dads ask them, choose. We only want to be in one program. They refuse. The girls love both programs, and they make the time to do them both. Personally, I think it's all about the cookies. I would much rather sell Girl Scout cookies than popcorn.
And what happens next? Can the girls then advance through the rest of Scouting with older girls?
Yes, so older girls. So BSA's program for older youth is called Venturing. That's where my elder son Nikhil is now. It's admitted high school age girls and boys for years, but only boys were allowed to work on advancement towards their Eagle rank. That all changed in 2019. And that's when Boy Scouts was officially rebranded as Scouts BSA, and girls like Zoe and Jennifer were invited to join. Each troop locally began engaging in a conversation with its charter organization about its membership standards. Did they want to form a girl troop? Did they want to stay focused on serving boys? That started a lot of conversations. Some of those are still ongoing. So my primary volunteer role today in Scouting is that of District Commissioner. That means I serve as a friend and advisor to Scout leaders all over Irvine as they deliver the program. I also get to hear about all of the parent concerns and complaints as we change these policies. So some of those parents were concerned about, frankly, having girls in the program. They heard that boys need space to develop and make mistakes without the pressure of girls. Girls mature faster. They're going to take all the good leadership positions. Some longtime Scout volunteers said they were going to quit. In Irvine, Troop 606 at University Methodist Church was the first to announce that it would accept girls. And it became a magnet for Scouting families. Other troops were really shocked when some of their most involved volunteers were transferring. In hindsight, is it really so surprising that parents of teens want both their boys and girls out of the house at the same time? Send them with a group whose leaders you already know and trust. So Nikhil's Troop 675 took a little bit more coaxing, but it turned out to be the second mover here in Irvine. We actually had trouble finding 5 families with girls that hadn't already joined Troop 606. Our girl troop finally came into being when a troop of former Girl Scouts got fed up with the way the boy troop committee that they were affiliated with was treating them. So Troop 675, we opened them with welcome arms, and the rest is history. I'm pleased to say that today, every pack in Irvine now is a family pack that accepts boys and girls, and 6 out of our 8 Scouts BSA troops now also serve girls. The other 2 have been asking me recently, how do we start a girl troop too? They've seen the change that it brings to the program. All in all, it's been a major change for the organization, but in my opinion, it's one for the better.
So it's clearly gone through a lot of transformation in these years, a lot of controversy. Many of us are familiar with the bankruptcy and then thus the selling off of camps. Can you just touch on that a little bit and how you think the Scouts will continue moving forward?
Certainly. So 2020 through 2022 was really tough for the organization. Between the fallout from the last decade of culture wars, the pandemic, the bankruptcy proceedings, membership has recently stabilized at about 1 million members. BSA is now 1/3 the size it was a decade ago. Unfortunately, IUCC's own Troop 602 was one of those many that were lost during the dark times. Thankfully, on the bankruptcy, a settlement was reached last September. A fund was established for victims of abuse that was perpetrated by Scouting leaders. Every council has made a contribution, and each of their insurance companies has been assigned their slice of the pie. Finally, I'd say BSA's policies on training and recognizing and preventing abuse have been further enhanced in consultation with representatives who experienced past abuse, experts in child abuse, and now compliance with both state and federal laws. As anyone who works with youth knows these days, California has implemented a statewide, rigorous and ongoing vetting process that applies to both volunteers and employees of all youth-serving organizations. Overall, this past decade has been the toughest in the organization's 113 years.
Well, I want to say how much I respect you because so many of us were really fed up and didn't want anything to do with the Boy Scouts, and it's clear to see that that came from both sides during this journey. But I'm really proud that you have been such a part of that transformation and that IUCC has been a part of it as well. And so as we continue to move forward, I think it's a great way to understand why we are celebrating Scout Sunday and the part of the journey that Scouting has been on and how many contributions that IUCC has made in our membership with Matt Mermack and Becky and you, and the way that we really have, you really have lived into that belief that we must be the change, and where we see those injustices from within to stand up and make a difference. So to wrap up, what more can Scouting offer today? Are there changes that you foresee? Why should someone continue to be a Scout once we've made it through all that?
Sure. So through all of the crises and controversy and national publicity, I would say BSA has maintained its focus on character development and teaching the principles of servant leadership. The materials I see the organization producing today are really well tuned to today's issues. I was recently thrilled when the Order of the Arrow, Scouting's Honor Society, published their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is a document that our own Becky Roche helped approve and roll out at the OA's National Conference just this fall. You know, this is the group that when I was a kid, we dressed up in Indian costumes and got whacked on the back and made to sleep out overnight. And reading that document, I was just like, oh my gosh, they nailed it. This is a document that actually makes me proud to be a member of the Order of the Arrow. What Scouting does best is provide experiential learning to really help kids safely push boundaries. It's a game with a purpose. We take a group of youth to the woods. We let them safely reenact Robinson Crusoe. It's an escape for them from high-scale schooling, social media anxiety, helicopter parents. My job as a Scoutmaster was always leave them alone. Go back to your own campsite. Scouting provides adventures that youth crave. So my hope for BSA is that it's been through its crucible of change. We have a new generation of leaders that have been formed, and we're going to take the movement somewhere amazing. Personally, I'm glad that our family found IUCC on this journey, and that IUCC has chosen to renew its support for Scouting by chartering Troop 691. Thank you.
Well, once again, thank you for sitting down with us and sharing more about the Scouting experience and this journey and transformation. We did have both Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts present. This obviously was the journey of how the Boy Scouts of America became Scouting BSA, but we do want to identify that Girl Scouts were always open and inclusive and have made many strides and advances in advocating for LGBT kids, transgender girls, and female empowerment. We hope next year to sit down with the Girl Scout leader when we do this, but what an important and wonderful opportunity we've had. Thank you so much for gifting us with that, and may we all continue to scout our way through the world, being kind and trustworthy and prepared. So with that,